Welcome to the Third Act. My name is Margot Spence, and I'm an in-house lawyer looking to plan my retirement years, or as I think of it, my third act. Everybody looks forward to retirement, a time to do what you want, when you want, a time to travel, pursue hobbies, and enjoy the fruits of your labor. But how do you find meaning in your day-to-day existence? How do you find your purpose and your people? For many professionals, especially lawyers, this can be a daunting transition. After 8 years of training and then many more years refining their craft, lawyers must transition from 40 years of 50-hour work weeks to something. This is especially a challenge for in-house legal counsel who are accustomed to being in the center of big decisions, spending their time analyzing and solving problems, collaborating with others, and engaging with their clients. How does that lifestyle translate to a satisfying retirement? One that provides physical and emotional well-being, intellectual stimulation, collaboration, and meaning? This is the question we will explore on this limited series podcast. On this episode of The Third Act, we will be chatting with Scott McFarlane. Scott retired 3 years ago as in-house counsel for the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, better known as ICBC. Scott has found a formula to follow as he transitions from his full-time career to his third act. I'm curious to know more and how his retirement is unfolding. Scott, thanks for agreeing to be on The Third Act.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So to begin, would you tell our listeners a bit about your career and what brought you to in-house work?
Sure. Well, I was fortunate to have a long and diverse practice, beginning with articling and then later beginning my practice as in-house counsel with the Canadian Pacific group of companies beginning in 1982. So CP companies were all the ones we know: CP Rail, CP Ships, CP Air, CP Trucks. And it was a bit unusual in the sense that we had regional offices all across Canada, but we did all of our own litigation and all of our own solicitors' work. So we didn't involve outside counsel. So we were involved in litigation involving train crashes, labor and employment law, property disputes, breach of contract, and on the solicitor side, drafting agreements, leases, commercial real estate transactions, equipment purchases, that kind of thing. So it was quite a diverse, unusual kind of practice. I found it really, really interesting. I was there through to 1996. And in the last 3 years, I actually ran the Vancouver office. And then CP moved its head office to Calgary and shut down the regional offices, including Vancouver, which meant I had to go elsewhere. And then I spent 3 years in private practice, set up my own firm briefly. Then I went to the Securities Commission and ultimately to the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, where I was for 18 years until the end of my legal career.
And what did you like best about in-house work?
I think what really appealed to me about working in-house, it was just a really good fit for me personally in terms of work hours, diversity of work, reasonable expectations, usually, not always, but usually, limited travel, which was important to me with a young family, reasonable compensation, of course, pensions and benefits, which you don't hear very much about these days. And I moved to the North Shore about 20 years ago to work with ICBC, who are located on the North Shore. And that was really convenient for me because I was only 10 minutes away from work, and it sort of coincided with the arrival of my two daughters. So it was a bunch of things, but it was a really good fit for me personally.
So how did you come to the decision that it was time to retire?
Well, I'd always sort of had it in my long range planning that I was going to work for 40 years. That was the idea and seemed like a good round number. And so I decided that once the 40 years were done, if it was feasible financially, I would pull the plug. And that's pretty much what I did. It wasn't quite that simple. Obviously, I had to plan financially for retirement. So that took decades of being reasonably careful with my spending. And I guess the other thing is that I wanted to retire while I was healthy and reasonably fit and able to do everything physically that I wanted to do, like traveling, playing tennis, which I do 3 or 4 times a week, and just having enough energy to do all the things that I was limited in doing while working 50 plus hours a week for the last 40 years.
So, did you have any concerns about what your day-to-day life in retirement would look like? And if so, how did you address them?
I didn't have any major concerns. I was aware, I talked to some other lawyers who had had some difficulty transitioning for any number of reasons, but I was pretty confident that I had done my time in the legal profession. I wasn't, there was nothing random or unpredictable really in terms of my planning. I wasn't 100% sure exactly what I would do in retirement, but I was pretty confident that I'd be able to find many things that would be of interest to me that I could do that were healthy, educational, or positive in some way. So I would say no major concerns. I was pretty confident it was going to work out.
So, you speak about things that you're interested in. What was your vision of retirement? Did you have set plans or did you think you just find it as you went? How did it go?
Yeah, well, there were I felt as though during my working years there were a few things that I had kind of let slip a little bit, and I think we can all relate to this. You're working really hard. If you've got a family, that takes up a lot of your time, obviously. And as I said, I had 2 daughters, and I felt like I hadn't done as much reading as I would have liked to do. I hadn't traveled as much, or even have really had an opportunity to do a lot of research before traveling, which is something that I enjoy doing. I try and get the most out of travel that I can. I felt like I had let my fitness lapse a little bit because, again, just because it wasn't maybe as much of a priority as it should have been or could have been when I was working. So really, my plan right out of the gate was to do a lot of those things that I felt like I had kind of neglected during my working career. So that was sort of what I envisioned. And then I guess the question is, how did how did that unfold? How did I bring that into effect?
Exactly. So, how did you?
Well, I'll just tell kind of a funny story about the first few days. So right out of the gate on my first day, I decided that I was going to create a 10 new things list. And so the concept there was that every day I would do 10 new things. So that might be go on a new hike, start a new book, learn some aspect of the world, be it geography or physics or whatever, or something about the environment that I'd always been curious about, those sorts of things. So that was the original plan. And of course, I had no idea whether that was achievable or not, but it just seemed like a good place to start. So that lasted for about 3 days. And I realized pretty quickly that it was completely unrealistic and unattainable. You can't do 10 new things a day. So I just quickly changed my concept to the 10 things list. So going forward, the idea was that I would do 10 things, and they had to be list worthy. They couldn't be grabbing coffee or answering the phone or something like that. So it might be reading a chapter from a book, researching a travel destination, going for a hike, walking the dog, playing an hour of tennis, those sorts of things. And so I tried that, and almost 3 years later, I'm still maintaining my 10 things a day list,
Wow.
and I find it really useful. And of course, that's just my way. I've talked to other people who I talked to a good friend of mine the other day, and he said, "Well, I don't do that, but I do a to-do list every day, and you can bet that there's at least 10 things on there by by the end of the day." So I guess that's a different way of doing it. But the concept is just try and think of doing some interesting things that you want to do every day, and whether that's 5 things or 10 things. For me, 10 works. So that's kind of how I started the plan, and it's worked out pretty well for me. Lo, these 3 years later.
Well, that's excellent. So, but the 10 things are basically helping you to change your old habits. So,
Yes. So they usually involve a fitness component, for example, and they involve a reading component and a learning component typically. So yes, exactly. It's designed to develop some of those areas that I had kind of let slip during my retirement. So that's exactly what it is. It's to do those things that I didn't have an opportunity to do when I wasn't retired. Well, now I have the opportunity, so let's do it.
let's do it exactly. I know the one thing I want to get rid of is sitting so much. I almost find in the day-to-day work as a solicitor, the work is very interesting, it's mentally engaging, but I'm really tired of sitting down.
Yeah,
I know you can have sit down, stand up desks, but it's not quite the same thing as movement.
exactly. And the way I look at it is now in retirement, you have 16 to 18 hours a day of time, and that it doesn't involve the 10 hours of work time. So you've got an extra 10 hours every day to do things. And so, on a typical day, I would get up at 6 or 6:30, turn on the coffee, head down to my computer, read the New York Times, and then open my planner. And it might have a variety of things that are already scheduled for the day. It might be playing tennis. I might have a board meeting on a charity that I'm involved in later that day. I might have a medical appointment, maybe a lunch with a family friend or something like that. And it might be all of the above. It might be quite a busy day. On the other hand, there might be nothing specifically planned, in which case I might spend the day reading, going for a walk, going shopping, organizing my desk, doing whatever I think, it sounds like it might be interesting or fun to do that day. So
Yeah.
it varies depending on the schedule. But what is really interesting is, and I think most retirees that I've talked to have said this, it's actually kind of surprising. There's never enough time. So it's kind of surprising, despite having all that extra time, it's still often not enough to get all the things done that you would ideally like to do. But it's much easier to get those things done in retirement.
You mentioned a board that you sit on. Now, were you involved in this charity before, or is this something new since you retired?
I've been involved. So the charity's called Kidsport. I've been involved with it for about 7 years, but I became the chair around the time of my retirement. That charity provides funding for children who have financial difficulties to enable them to participate in sport. And given all of the things that need to be done to support that charity, fundraising, working on social media, holding events, board meetings, that probably takes up 10 hours a week of my time. So that's something that I really enjoy doing and has been really rewarding for me. And so, that's one of the things that I would definitely recommend for people that are retired if they're looking for an opportunity to volunteer. Certainly, getting on a board is a great option, and I think the charities in particular are thrilled to have lawyers on their boards because they know that lawyers are hardworking and reliable and dedicated and intelligent and all of those things that you're looking for in a board member.
Right. So when you were trying out your 10 things or 10 new things a day, was there anything that you did and you think, oh, that's not working? I'm not doing that again.
Very, very much. And I'll just give one example. I had always had this preconceived notion that going to a coffee shop and just reading a book all day would be really fun. And I've been into Starbucks or Tiziano's or other coffee shops, and you would see some elderly gentleman in the corner with his book and his coffee reading away. And I thought, wow, that looks like it might be fun. So one day I took my book down to the coffee shop and ordered my double cappuccino and sat in the corner reading my book. And after about half an hour, I said to myself, what am I doing here? It's loud. People are making lots of noise. There's the clanging of the coffee. The coffee isn't any better than the coffee I've got at home. I'd much rather be at home with my dog and my whoever happens to be home that day, sitting in my comfortable chair. So, that's just kind of a funny example of something that seemed like a good idea, but in practice, it didn't work out quite as I had planned. So I learned from that. I mean, everybody's different. Everybody has things that they enjoy doing and not doing. And you just have to plot your own course and try out different things and see if they work for you. And if not, try different things.
So you know what's neat about the 10 new things is it forces you to leave your house and reach out.
Yes, totally.
Because often people say when they leave employment, the phone doesn't ring. It just stops
Yeah,
because you're no longer part of that work environment and you're off to something else. And that can be a bit disappointing if you're just waiting.
definitely.
So it sounds like you've got the right motivation to seek out other interests.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's some of that was planned before I retired. I did, give a fair bit of thought to how it was all going to unfold, but some of it evolves during retirement because you're never really sure what it's going to look like or how you're going to spend your days. So for sure, but that is a big part of it is getting out and doing different things because with all that spare time, yes, I mean you could stay home and sit around watching TV all day or not doing anything that's particularly fulfilling or rewarding. You need some rest for sure. That's something I would definitely say is take advantage of that opportunity every once in a while to just sit back and relax because you earned it. But I think as lawyers, we have a tendency to want to be busy, to want to be fulfilled, to have a sense that we've made accomplishments. And so that doesn't end in retirement. I think that's something that's part of our personalities. And so you can't just abandon all of that the day you retire. It's going to carry through to retirement, which I think is a good thing.
For sure. Is there anything you would have done differently?
Well, I'm not going to make the mistake that Kamala Harris made and said I wouldn't do anything differently because that's not true. But there were some things probably financially. You trying to make a home run on a junior gold mining stock once or twice, things like that. That yes, had I to do it differently, I would have done it differently. But I'm content with my career, generally with the decisions I made. I feel as though I made a contribution to the legal community, which we all want to do, and to the companies that I worked for. So, is there anything major that I would have done differently? I don't think so, but absolutely, there were some, as is the case with all of us, some twists and turns that were unexpected, some decisions that I made probably in with respect to my career that I might have done differently. I might have stayed longer here or there. I might have left a little bit earlier here or there. But in
Mhm.
general, I'm pretty happy with the way it all turned out.
Excellent. And with your retirement, it's going along, the plan is working, and there's nothing you would have done differently. I guess you can if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I would still like to do more of those things that I identified as being those sorts of things that I would like to do in retirement. So it's always sort of a balancing act. I'd like to, for example, play more tennis, but I'm not getting any younger. And so that comes into play. And then it's, well, okay, if you want to be able to play more tennis, maybe you have to do more stretching classes or more yoga or that sort of thing. And so that evolves. Or reading. It's kind of a funny story. I have a friend who's a lawyer in his 60s, and he was talking to a friend of his My lawyer friend was reading a book that his friend didn't think was very impressive, and his friend said, "Well, how many books do you read a year?" And my lawyer friend said, "Well, about 2 books a year." And so the other fellow said, "Well, think about it. If you've only got 20 years left on this earth and you're reading 2 books a year, that's 40 books you've got left." And that was kind of sobering. That snapped my head back, and I thought, okay, then I better be reading two more than 2 books a year, or if I'm only reading 2 books a year, they better be good books or something that that really resonates with me, because that's not many. So those sorts of things, it's all about balance, but just trying to keep going, keep working on those things that you really enjoy, and that's the challenge and the fun, I guess, of retirement.
Right. So, what tips would you share with the listeners when planning their third act?
Excellent question. So I do have some tips. These are things that really help me, and I hope they'll be helpful to your listeners. Everybody's different, of course, but these are the things that I think are important. So number one, you have to find a way to stay active physically. I really think that's important. Good health is really important. Maintaining good health. Have a fitness plan on doing some sort of physical activity daily. It doesn't have to be hours long or even that strenuous, but do something, and make that a priority. Make sure that you do that, maybe not every day, but at least 2 or 3 times a week for sure. Eat well, read about health and diet, get regular checkups, don't drink too much, just be good to yourself and your body. You're in your 60s or your 70s, probably. We're not as young as we used to be. We don't bounce back as quickly as we used to, or at least I don't. And so I think you really have to focus on your physical well-being. So that would be the first thing. Get a hobby, and maybe it's doing more of what you really like to do that you weren't able to do, or maybe it's something entirely new, but find something that you really like doing and then do it a lot. Maybe you become a history buff, or you learn about some historical event that has always sort of intrigued you, and you could even become an expert in that historical event, World War II or whatever. Pick up a new instrument. Maybe you've always had an interest in guitar or piano or something like that. You've got time to do it now, so maybe take some lessons, learn that new thing. You'll derive a lot of satisfaction out of that. Travel, of course, hike, or whatever it is that is something that you think you might be interested in doing much more regularly. I have a friend who's become a bridge nut. So not so much physical, but it's keeping his mental acuity going. So whatever that is, I would recommend using your legal skills in some capacity. And we talked about working for a charity, a nonprofit organization. Any of them would love to have someone on their board that was a lawyer. Just pick a cause that you really believe in, and get involved. I talked about kid sport. I also am on the governance committee at my tennis club, and we look at bylaws and rules of the club. And so there's some legal drafting involved in that. So I kind of keep my hands in the formal legal world. And so, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And I think most lawyers would in some capacity. Personally, I try and keep up with the legal community. I go on the BC Supreme Court website 2 or 3 times a week. I read the new cases, which I always find fascinating. Others might not so much, but that's something I really enjoy doing. One of my daughters is in law school, so that's been really interesting to talk to her about being in law school, and debating some of the legal issues that come up for her in her courses, and that kind of thing. So keep up with the legal community, and whatever that means to you. Friends and family, of course, make time for them. You've got the time now. Stay in touch with your lawyer friends. Again, it's that transition into retirement. You don't want to just completely cut off the old world, because there were a lot of good things about the old world. So keep up with those lawyer friends, but develop new friends as well. Join a club, make friends there. Reach out to old friends that you lost track of. Maybe because you've been so busy, you haven't been able to talk to that old friend that you knew in university or whatever. Well, now you've got the time. Reach out to them, and obviously spend more time with the people that you want to spend more time with. Reflect. So spend some time thinking about where you've come from, how you got to where you are. Maybe there's things that you feel great about. Well, celebrate those. Maybe there's a few things you wish you had done differently, and maybe there's things that you can do, to make amends for those things, or even reflect on how you might handle similar situations in the future. So just spend some time to reflect. Learn, because obviously as a lawyer, you've got an excellent brain. Use it. Learn about things that you haven't had a chance to learn about in the past. Geography, physics, robotics, the financial system, how political systems work, all of those sorts of things. I really, really enjoy having the opportunity to just learn more about the world. And I guess try not to sweat the small stuff, as they say. Yes, you should probably clean out that crawl space that's been gathering miscellaneous stuff for the last 30 years. And probably there's more lawn care that could be done. You've got binders full of old research that you just haven't been able to bear to part with. All those old clothes in the closet, at some point you've got to go through those, but that isn't a priority. That can happen over time. So don't be thinking, oh boy, now that I've retired, what I'm going to have to do is get to all those unfun things, that mundane things that have been kind of left undone all those years. You can get to those, but don't let that interfere with your enjoyment of your retirement. So I think those are probably the key things for me.
Those are all very good points and good advice. And I'm sure it'll resonate with many people about what their retirement might look like.
Right.
So as a wrap up, now that you've experienced retirement, what is the one thing you know for sure about your third act?
Well, the one thing I know for sure is that it's not going to unfold exactly as planned. So I know that I have no idea how long it's going to last, or where it will unfold necessarily, or exactly what I'll be doing. But I do know that I have the time and resources and the inclination to make it as enjoyable and rewarding as it possibly can be. And I feel that it's largely up to me and to all of us as retirees to use the time sensibly, thoughtfully, enjoyably. As I've said before, read a lot, exercise a lot, hang out with friends and family, travel, and break it up with a lot of rest, because you earned it.
Well, thank you, Scott. That's amazing advice. And it sounds like you've got things organized and you're enjoying yourself. I want you to thank you for sharing your thoughts, experience, and guidance on retirement. I'm particularly keen to try the 10 things. I won't do the 10 new things. I'll do the 10 things per day approach to changing old habits and creating new ones that will suit my third act. I've also learned from you that transitions are achieved through trial and error, and that it's a continual process, not just a race to reach the end goal, and that there's interest and satisfaction in the process itself, and maybe a few good stories that come out of that. I'll be incorporating most of these things into my retirement plan. Thank you for listening to The Third Act. The creation of this podcast has been made possible with the support of the Canadian Corporate Counsel Association, who has provided the platform to publish this podcast from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. I also want to acknowledge the support of Dr. Wilson Kwong of the Inspired Dental Group. The Inspired Dental Group is located at Oak Ridge Centre and downtown Vancouver, both located in British Columbia. Dr. Wilson Kwong is an accomplished, forward-thinking, and patient-centric dentist with 35 years of practical experience. Motivated by the principles of trust, integrity, customer service, and clinical prowess, Dr. Wilson Kwong created the Inspired Dental Group 15 years ago to serve the community of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This podcast would not be possible without the technical skills of Alex Worden of Webcast Guru, and of course the generosity of the lawyers from across Canada who agreed to be interviewed. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this limited series podcast, or in retirement in general. Please join me for the next episode of this series. Until then, I wish you happy planning for your third act.